Mike has already flown off out of Baltimore. I left him off there. But the Red Mass, for anybody who's new today and didn't hear yesterday, Red Mass is an annual event. It's actually held at local Catholic churches too, cathedrals, regional cathedrals. But the main one is in D.C., and it happens the Sunday prior to the first Monday in October, which is when the Supreme Court session opens each year. And in Washington, D.C., the Red Mass has been happening. This was the 60th anniversary, the 60th Red Mass. They gave us these, I forgot to bring it in, they gave us these fancy programs with silver leaf engraving on it and parchment paper and everything. Anyway, so the Red Mass in D.C. is another one of these things that was created in the early 1950s during the Red Scare. So it's been going on, and of course that's their right to have that. Now today, when we arrived, I witnessed the Red Mass a couple of years ago as a protester outside of the cathedral. That year, Biden was there in addition to the justices, and Secret Service was there 2 years ago. So security 2 years ago was about 50% tighter than it was today. But today they still had a zillion U.S. Marshal Service officers, Metropolitan Police, but they didn't have metal detectors. They said they learned midnight before the event whether the vice president or the president is coming, and so neither of them were coming. And the representative for the church we talked to on the street, if I understood her correctly, that Obama has never attended the Red Mass, and that if he doesn't attend the Red Mass by the end of his presidency, he will be the only president since 1953 that has not attended the Red Mass in Washington, D.C. But you never know what can happen in the future. Anyway, the cathedral is a very beautiful cathedral. It holds about 1,000 people, and it was full, and they were standing room only. And in walks, I actually didn't see Justice Roberts walk in. I saw him walk out at the end, but Justice Roberts walked in, Justice Thomas, Justice Kennedy, Justice Breyer, Justice Scalia, who was sort of hunched over like a toad and scurried in with his security and sat down. And they did bow. The Catholic ones did bow at the front. When they get to the front, they kneel or bow and then sit down. I understand Justice Kagan was there. Stewart here? Stewart back there? He's probably out there. He's tabling, okay. He saw Justice Kagan. I didn't see Justice Kagan. So anyway, we were given seats back in the peon section, of course. You know, we were not the preferred people. And the ceremony was actually quite boring, very boring. And it really didn't have anything, the content wasn't shocking. I mean, it was pretty typical, and there was no attempt really to pressure the justices or lobby them on a particular issue. At one point they mentioned to respect all life, you know, as a life thing, a little, very brief mention. But they didn't try to get into the whole health care contraceptive thing. They didn't try to lobby the justices to that. So that was good. When it came time for the communion, to take communion, of course, there are instructions in the little booklet that, you know, Catholics can do this, that. If you're not Catholic, you can do this, that. If you're not Christian at all, you can't take communion, you know. Well, Mike Newdell somehow ended up eating a little cracker. Tuesdays and everything. And it was standing up and sitting down, and standing up and sitting down. And we tried to respect that initially, to at least stand up, you know, and everybody else is standing up for the music or whatever it was. But towards the end, like, we were just the only ones sitting down. At one point, Mike was the only one. You should have seen the U.S. Marshal looking at Mike. And then at one point, Mike was pretty much one of the only ones standing up. He was doing everything contrary to what was going on. But anyway, so, I mean, I'm glad I went to it from the inside. I really probably wouldn't go again unless I had some inside information that there was going to be some attempt to lobby the justices. And these justices are getting old. They are getting old. Several of them were pretty hunched over. And so that's what makes it so critical without specifying who people should vote for. Because we don't do that, 501c3, at least PA non-believers is. I'm just speaking for myself anyway, but this election is so critical because the next president will likely appoint replacements for two of the hunched-over, toadish, well, we would hope, toadish justices. So that's really, nobody's talking about that in this election. Nobody's really talking about, so you hear ever debates about who's going to nominate Supreme Court justices. We're not hearing that this time. So anyway, very important. You have a question? She was not. And of course, Ginsburg was not, because she had a big rift with them years ago when the whole abortion thing, it was heavy-handed abortion stuff, and she said, I'm never going back. I think it's a bunch of years ago she said that. Anyway, so that was that. Are you ready? I need a couple more minutes?
We're close.
Close.
Yes, I think we're good.
Yep. Okay. Oh, so are you ready for the speakers to come up? Are all the speakers here? We're going to have let me give you a little bit of background. As a diplomat from PA non-believers to the Pittsburgh groups, I happened to be out of Pittsburgh a few months ago, and I went to a great group, a large gathering. I had a restaurant, a brunching skeptically group, and I said to Bill Kay, one of the organizers, I said, can I tell your group about the conference? And he said, sure, so forth, so on. Anyway, I ended up sitting down across from a young woman, and I said to her, is there anything you'd like to see at this conference? She said, well, I'd like to see a panel or a discussion about science and education, that kind of thing. I said, well, that's great. How about you be the moderator of it? So she actually agreed. I helped line up a few of the speakers, and she lined up a few. And so I will introduce her now. She wishes to be known as KD. She will be the moderator, and she'll introduce the panelists.
Hi everybody, thank you for coming. It's great to see such a big turnout in the middle of a Sunday afternoon. I'm Katie, Christine Danowski, and Carl described how we met. And I am a former research chemist. I was downsized from a large chemical company. And ever since then, for about the last 7-8 years, I've been a chemistry professor at various colleges and universities, mostly in the Pittsburgh area, but some other universities in some other states. So the topic of our panel is impediments to science education from grade school to grad school and beyond. So let me have our panelists introduce themselves.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay. Hi, my name is Lauri Lebo, and hi Dan, by the way, I must introduce myself afterwards. I was a newspaper reporter for 20 years, and I'm going to, as I always tell everybody, I have no background in science, and it's kind of pathetic how little I knew about science, but back in 2005, 2005, there was a case where I worked in York, Pennsylvania. One of the local school districts tried to force the concept of intelligent design into science class. And Dover, Pennsylvania, Kitzmiller v. Dover. And I was the lead local reporter on that. Became fascinated with this issue. I knew just enough about science to realize that that was pretty much bullshit. And so that's how I came to this issue. And still passionate about it.
Hi, my name is Emily Davis, and I'm on the engineering and mathematics side of the panel here. I work for a large environmental consulting firm. I'm a project manager and a chemist and toxicologist with them, and I do environmental cleanups. And Lawrence Benander and I have had the pleasure of working together for many, many years again in filming, though neither of us are any longer there.
Hi, I'm Stephen Hirtle from University of Pittsburgh. I'm on the faculty in the School of Information Sciences. I also help organize the Steel City Skeptics and other groups in Pittsburgh. My undergraduate degree is in Iowa. She's smiled. Nothing like Iowa. Never quite said it that slowly. And my background is in math and psychology, and I'm interested in making students aware of challenging their assumptions. I'll say about that later.
Does this one work? Okay, good. I'm Sharon Hill. I'm a geologist, a writer, researcher, and a skeptical activist. And I have a master's degree in education, and the focus was on science in the public. And my current interests are in pseudoscience and the paranormal and the presentation of science to general audiences. So things like what they see on TV or in the news. And I write a web column for Skeptical Inquirer called Sound Sciencey, where I talk about things that appear to be science but really aren't. And I also run a news blog site called Doubtful News, where I take a critical look at weird and questionable claims in the news and look at the science, what the science really says.
Well, thank you very much, everyone, for being on the panel. I guess we can open it up now. So to offer your perspectives on superstition and nonsense of any sort, and how that has affected education with your students, your peers, your children. Do you think it's better now than it was before? Are we first scientific literacy worse now in the U.S. than it was before? What do you think are some of the causes of our lack of science education? And so everyone, let's go first.
When back in 2006 during the Dover trial, and Judge Jones had ruled that intelligent design was simply revamped creationism, I remember talking to the plaintiffs in this case, and we thought that maybe this was the pinnacle of sort of crazy that we were going to see, and then we were going to start moving back towards rational discourse. I remember, I'm saying 2006, we've been paying attention since then. I think one of the saddest things is that it's in the wake of Dover, it's kind of only gotten crazier. I think things have gotten more absurd as we've been going. How do you guys feel?
Well, I was going to say that television has a lot to do with people's impression of what science is or what it should look like. And for my master's thesis, what I did was I looked at amateur paranormal investigators and how they use science. And what I found out, to make a really long story short, was that they got their idea of science and what scientists do from what they saw on TV. None of them were scientists, but they emulated what they thought science should look like. And I think that kids especially get so much of their information from pop culture, the internet, and TV, that they have this mistaken sense of what science is supposed to be, and they may not know scientists, or they may not be interested in science in school because of the way it's presented. So I think that our pop culture has a lot to do with the way people interpret what science is supposed to be.
Yeah. Is it not that one? Yeah, I think it's getting, in some ways it's getting both worse and better at the same time. And that there are, I think there are some fantastic shows out there thinking about pop culture that, I know my daughter really loved Mythbusters and thought that was the greatest show, and that's sort of teaching science at a really fun level. At the same time, we have communities in the U.S. that are just closing themselves down to science and just assuming the world works the way, I guess their pastor might say. You know, there's things like the Creation Museum at the other end it's in Kentucky. I keep thinking it's in Ohio. Yeah, Kentucky, near Cincinnati, and you've been there twice. And it's just like, how could this possibly be built? How could people actually go there in this day and age?
I wanted to add a little bit to that. I work with a self-selected group of people who are scientists, engineers, and we work in, I work in Alabama, which is in the midst of the Bible Belt, but also at one of the Army installations there, which Army installations, the population tends to have a higher respect for authority. We've done public meetings frequently, and I've actually, I am dealing with a group, with a general population who I think has a higher interest in if not knowledge of, but interest in technological things. And I've actually been, compared with other places where I've done public meetings through the South and other parts of the country, I've been very impressed with the willingness of the public to come in, listen to what the Army's doing for cleanup programs, because that's what we're doing down there, and actively try and engage and understand what we're doing. So there's, like you were saying, in some ways it's getting, there's ways it's getting worse, but on the other ways, in other ways it's getting better. If they're willing, people are willing to come in and engage you on it and listen to the material you have to present. I do think even in an area that is highly religious, there can be meaningful dialogue.
That's interesting because I've actually taught at the college level in Texas and in Pennsylvania, and we always hear about Texas being the Bible Belt, ultra-religious, conservative state, and I haven't seen much of a difference between Pennsylvania students and Texas students in terms of how much science they know, how much science they're willing to learn, which I was surprised because with Texas's reputation, as you said, I thought that it would be worse in Texas, but it wasn't. But what I did find in Texas, more so than in Pennsylvania, was a lack of basic literary educational skills in students. For example, I had this one student, I was giving a test. The class was preparatory chemistry, and this was a science class for people who had no science background, who'd never taken science in high school or wanted to brush up. So I was assuming absolutely no scientific knowledge. And on the test, I had some math problems, and students could bring calculators if they wanted. Well, this one student comes up during the test, and he said, "How do you add these numbers?" I said, "I'm sorry, I don't understand your question." He said, "I don't know how to add numbers containing decimal points." And I thought, so you're a first-year college student, and you can't do this? I learned this in 4th grade. And I showed him, and he did well on the test. He ended up getting an A in the class. He wasn't stupid by any means, but somewhere along the line, he either was not taught or did not pick up this skill. And I find that that was the most egregious example. But that happened a lot more in Texas than it did in Pittsburgh. So I thought it was kind of, I was still blows me away when I tell that story, like, my gosh, how can you be a first-year college student and not know this?
I guess I might add, clearly the U.S. scores in science and math are going way down, and there's an effort to try to increase funding at the NSF level in their STEM programs, which is kind of a lousy acronym, but has nothing to do with plants at all, but science, technology, engineering, and math that they've identified. Yet at the same time, in the state level, particularly Pennsylvania, we have a government that's cutting education budgets seriously. And these are two forces which are, and I think the budget's going to win out. The budget cuts are going to overcome all the good ideas that teachers are having.
I think that's one of the things I have, since the Dover trial, I've made, spent an awful lot of time tracking what's happening with attacks on science education in the public school system. And 5 years ago, what we were mostly seeing was trying to get these religious notions into the public schools. I think what we're seeing now is sort of a trend towards, okay, we're not winning this case, intelligent design is dead, let's try something else. And what we're seeing is the voucher movement. We're trying to actually there is a movement, and Governor Corbett has been very clear that what he wants to do is privatize public education. And in that attempt to do that, we have a lot of Christian schools who are lining up trying to get involved in this as well. One of the big things we're seeing right now is in Louisiana. How many people are familiar with what happened with the vouchers going on down there? And it's out of hand. They're using, with Louisiana tax dollars, students are going to be learning, I guess they've started learning this year from textbooks that include lesson plans on dinosaurs and man walk together. Dragons were real, actually existed. Let's see, I'm sorry, I wrote a few of them down before. They're just, the Great Depression, it wasn't that bad. These are Bob Jones textbooks that they'll be using. And then of course the Trail of Tears, yes, that wasn't nice, but it was all about bringing Indians to learn the lessons of God. So that's what's happening with vouchers, and by the way, in Pennsylvania, Governor Corbett's still huge on that and wants to see that brought to us.
Yeah, it brings up a point is that, like, some people think that science is a democracy. You know, that you could, that by as many people want to vote on what they want their kids to learn about science, and it don't work that way. But it's, we're in this culture where, like, everyone values opinions, like, oh, I have an opinion, so my opinion must be just as valid as yours. Well, no, I mean, in science it doesn't work that way. If you don't come to the table with some sort of reference and something to back you up, it means nothing. And I really get upset when I see this sort of democratization of science by the parents saying, well, the majority of us want our kids to learn this. And it's really, I think, a problem. That's a problem.
Yeah, I see that in my classes too. One of the classes I teach now is a survey course for non-science majors, and it covers physics, chemistry, astronomy, earth sciences, and biology. And the science department of this university has made the second stretch of this class, the students had to do a mandatory presentation on evolution. And so the science department is, of course, stressing real science over crap. But I get so much resistance from students. And during the first week in class, we spend a week and a half talking about what science is and what it does and how it works, and that science is not a democracy, and that laws of nature cannot be changed the way human laws can change, and scientists don't get a vote on what is real. Like, we didn't pick evolution, we didn't pick gravity, we can't change it. And a lot of students have trouble with that concept. That somewhere along the line they seem to pick up that, well, you know, scientists, they pick and choose what they want to, what is real and what is not real, or they somehow can control, they have control over what they research. And I found that, I was very, very surprised to do that, because as a scientist, of course, I know that's not true. I wish it was true, but it's not. So I wondered, where do they get this notion from?
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, the notion of democracy is a beautiful concept, you know, that we all do have a say in how we're doing. And I believe it was Mencken, and I'm going to have to paraphrase this quote, but he says, you know, we all have the right to argue passionately for our ideals and our beliefs, and you know, it's strong. What we don't have the right to, though, is have everyone respect them.
And I think, I'm wondering about your student who didn't know how to add decimals, and I had a similar kind of, I've had other experiences in the class, which always shock me when that happens. And they don't seem particularly embarrassed about a lack of knowledge. And I think that's what struck me about, earlier in the conference, somebody brought up our wonderful Missouri Congressman Todd Akin, who did not seem to have a basic understanding of how the female body works. And what you might not realize, maybe you do, is he's on the Committee for Science, Space and Technology. He's a sitting representative. So he's the one who's making decisions on what should be funded in science. And there's no exam to get into Congress. You don't have to be intelligent to get into Congress. You just need a number of votes. And I think at some point we need to have the scientists decide what science should be taught. And there's a real disconnect. And it starts in Congress and gets worse.
Yeah, I read somewhere online, I don't know if it was Jezebel or Gawk or one of these sites, that they had a graphic of the members of the Science Committee in Congress, or by the House of Representatives, and what these people actually knew about science. What are their qualifications? It was just appalling. I mean, Todd Akin is the thing. He's just tip of the iceberg. I mean, they're even bigger ignoramuses than he is, which is scary. And these are the people, as you said, Steve, who are deciding where our tax dollars go.
Don't forget the philosophy, as Rick and Torrin said, we're under attack by the educated elite in this country.
Christine, you had some slides you wanted to show, or?
I think we've covered a lot of that. We'll do them later on.
Okay.
I'm having fun with this discussion.
Okay. So in your talk this morning, Sharon, you said something I thought was very interesting. You said that scientific skepticism and critical thinking, and forgive me if I misunderstood you, should be taught and encouraged, but not forced. And I agree with that. So I wanted to ask, what is the best way to teach science and scientific skepticism and critical thinking?
I don't know the answer to that. I think that there's a number of different methods. I don't particularly like the way science is taught in school today. I mean, I have two children, one is 9, one is 14. So I've seen them go through elementary science, and I'm not all that happy with it. I mean, they're interested in it, and I don't think that a lot of other kids would be interested in it, because it doesn't really hit on items that affect their lives so much. In some cases it does. You know, you take kids out to a wetland area and you have them look for bugs and animals and stuff, and you explain the ecosystem, and they think that's fun. But when you get into the older grades, when you have to have a teenager sit through a chemistry class, that's tough for them. It doesn't feel like it relates to them Now, this summer I went and I talked to kids twice. I went to 2 summer camps, and I talked to one group about 2012 and their fears of 2012 and the science or non-science that was behind those kind of beliefs. And boy, were they interested. They think about this stuff a lot. They worry about it. And they don't know if the stuff they hear on TV or coming from their parents or their peers has any validity at all. They can't tell. So they were kind of, they were very interested in that. And then I talked to Camp Inquiry, which is a camp for skeptical kids growing up in a skeptical family. So they were sort of a different audience. But again, they were interested in a lot of things. And I think even as an adult, if you're trying to connect science to the real world, you have to key on items that people are interested in. And that was one of the questions you sort of prepped us with about scientific literacy or science literacy. I don't think science literacy is just what kids learn in school. It's a lifelong process, and we have to focus on that, including maybe informal education opportunities to draw people into things they're really interested in, because like you said, they have a lot of opportunities to learn about stuff today, so it's not that bad. Maybe they do know a lot about medicine. If they've had a difficulty in their family, they know a lot about cancer research or something. So if you hit on something that people are interested in, that's a gateway for them to learn and appreciate science.
Well, one of the things I try to do in my class is relate science to students' everyday experiences. Because I emphasize to them that science is not a bunch of unrelated facts they have to memorize. And that science is a tool. It's the only tool we have for finding things out about the world. And as we go through each chapter, we actually use a very, very good textbook. And of course it's I don't want to say it's dumbed down, but again, some of this stuff is what I learned in grade school. This is a university level science class for non-majors. I've had people who did not know that the Earth goes around the sun. Seriously. So after that was the first class I ever taught, the first time I ever taught this class. So now I assume nothing. I assume no scientific knowledge. But so in our chapter we did Isaac Newton, laws of motion. Pretty basic, straightforward stuff. So I try to relate it to baseball, sports. Sports were always popular in Pittsburgh. Try to have something something that students are able to relate. And like, well, when you hit that, when you're playing pool, you're playing billiards, and you aim your cue at that with a white ball, I don't know, whatever ball it is, and you hit the cue ball, thank you. Yeah, I should learn more about this before I run my mouth. But when I explained how the balls collide, that's an example of Newton's laws of motion, so stuff like that. So I try to keep it to stuff that students understand. So not something that's so abstract that they'll think, well, I don't really care about this stuff. I had a student say to me, actually in class, I forget what the context was, but he said, why do I have to learn this bullshit? And he was, I forget what his major was. And I sat there and explained to him, well, that if you're going to be a productive citizen, an informed voter, and you're going to decide where your tax dollars go, don't you think it's a good idea that you know a little bit about science and a little bit about biology and medicine, so you can make informed decisions as a voter, because you're paying for this stuff. And don't you want to know what you're paying for? And so this particular person, he kind of, after his outburst, he kind of hit the books for a while after that. So who knows? Who knows what, if he took me seriously or not.
The other thing I might add is, one of the courses I teach is it's called Human Information Processing. It's a course in cognitive psychology about how people think, and I'm in an information school, so we use it in how people think about information. And actually the skeptic community has a wide number of resources that I pull in. Michael Shermer's book on why people believe weird things. Probably not part of the skeptic community, but Dan Simons wrote a book called The Invisible Gorilla, How Our Intuitions Deceive Us. And the whole thing is sort of seeing is not believing. Scientific American had an article with Penn and Teller on the cover talking about how why magic tricks work, and it's all what you see is not what you get. And students love this, and I think it's a way of slipping in what the skeptical community can provide to us and add to science, and the resources are out there. So I would say use those resources in ways that you can.
Talking on the subject of connecting, of having opportunities to engage people in something they're interested in, there's nothing like a public meeting to do that, because generally it's, you're talking members of the public, they're not necessarily involved in science at all, and yet it is really a teachable moment. They finally want to understand what this geology is all about, and what do these chemicals in their water, do to them, and how much is safe, and that's what I found. It's actually been able to have broader discussions with members of the public, and feel like I'm getting a little bit more information to them, because they're really ready to learn at that moment. So that is so true that, with the students, I've had students like that too, why do we need to know this thing about chemicals? Well, here's an example. Someday they may be living in some place where their groundwater pollution is an issue for them, or air pollution is an issue for them. So, but it's trying to catch those concepts and then use it to teach the thornier, meatier, harder parts of science that honestly, it's just one of those to gain proficiency in science. Those of us that do it, there's a certain amount of time to just work at it, like anything else. To be good at anything, work at it, and that's something else to convey, is that it's not always an easy or fun thing to do. It is work sometimes.
A quick story. I also work in the environmental field, and two completely different situations turned out differently. We did public meetings for two situations, and in the one public meeting, it was about a community that was having a problem with sinkholes, and they were very interested to learn the process. So I was actually talking to them and showing them around and describing the geology, and they were so interested, and they did their own research and background because they wanted to know more. And that was encouraging, and I had a good time with that. I had a good time teaching, talking to people about that. And then on the other side of the coin, we had a public meeting out near the Philadelphia area of a community that was experiencing problems with blasting complaints from a local quarry. So we did this, there's a really big study, and we came in, we presented the study and all our graphs and all our data, and at the end, one woman stands up and says, "That's all science. I'm going to tell you the facts." And she completely ignored everything we said, and it was a disaster. But what it was also, we were up here, they were out there, and there was a disconnect that we couldn't reach.
There's also the long-range goal that I've been seeing in some of the churches. I know I have been down to Dino World, or the Creationist Museum with Dr. Dino, and I actually visited where they showed these beautiful little kids, like 8 and 9 years old, showed them about young Earth creationism and how the world's only 6,000 years old. And then after the kids watched this video, they asked me questions. And they said, okay, how old's the Earth? The little girl raises her hand. She says, it's 6,000 years old. And they said, very good, here's peanut butter now. How did Noah get the dinosaurs on the ark. Well, we only took baby dinosaurs. Very good. Here's a Snickers bar. So this went on and on. And then they praised the kids. They said, this is excellent. I'm so, you guys did a great job. And then they said, but just remember this lesson, because when you guys get up to school and you guys are sitting in science class, your teachers are going to lie to you. And don't let them.
Hello? Okay. Okay, so why don't we open up for questions from the audience now? We have about 5 minutes left, so please, we welcome your questions, so please come up and ask.
Very important subject. Thank you for the panel. Some time ago, I was involved in a project to try to advocate for teaching the process of science over the facts of science. Good science education implies good science educators. One of the things I kept hearing was that we cannot test the science process. We can test the science facts. Here's the multiple choice. You just check off the atomic weight of oxygen. That's what you need to know. How do you test the acquisition of knowledge in learning the science process?
I'm not a scientist, but I'll just say briefly, that's one of the saddest stories about No Child Left Behind, is that we're not teaching our students how to think and how to go through the process anymore. We are teaching them to the test. And that's one of the great follies, I think, that we're seeing in this country right now.
Well, what I try to do is ask students not to regurgitate things from their textbook. I don't have them memorize any formulas, for example. I want them to know what the formulas mean. For example, if we have the behavior of gases, Boyle's law, right? Pressure-volume relationships. The pressure increases, the volume has to decrease. Things like that. Why do you think that is? Explain that whole thing. Explain why, all things being equal, the pressure of a gas increases, the volume has to decrease. Things like that to get them to think about why these relationships exist and not just spit back a formula at me or just plug and chug where I give them some numbers and they just fit it into some equation. So I asked, like, what does Newton's third law mean? For every reaction is an equal and opposite reaction. What does that mean? It hasn't tell me. So that's one way that I really know to avoid this brute force memorization.
I think this is on. So I think it's a problem that you need to have some basic facts in order to build the knowledge on it. So when I talk, I spend a lot of time talking about the assumptions and how do you do experiments. But I also think we want some real facts. And right now we're sort of a scientific illiterate community. I do have these slides. I'll just show you one that sort of jumps out at me. I got it here. Don't worry about this. This was from The Economist magazine in May 2003 about the North Korea missile threat. Depending on what missiles they build and how far they could range, and the argument was trying to make that it's a sort of a limited problem. What they're somehow in presenting this, in drawing it, in producing it, The Economist never caught on to the fact that we don't live on a flat planet, and we don't live on a flat planet with a Mercator projection, but we live on a round planet. And if you plot the concentric circles on a round planet and put it back on Mercator, you get something like this. And so the geoscience community is saying, why isn't this just basic knowledge? Why don't you look at that and it looks like the clock is backwards? And there's sort of this basic set of facts that you need to do in this sort of fluidity with information that's just not there.
So, next question.
Hi. So I'm pretty much scientific illiterate, and I try to read the books for dummies, and even those are above my head. But I do understand things when they end up being relevant to my life. And for instance, so I live in Pittsburgh, Marcellus Shale, am I going to have clean drinking water? You know, then I start paying attention. And I think Stephen's illustration right now is that perfect thing. For instance, some people are telling me that Iran constitutes a nuclear threat. And I'm wondering, is that true? You know, I hear about, like, they've done so much toward refining the uranium to make a nuclear bomb. I don't have the background to understand that, but scientists in the public arena can really give me some reality, because I know there's people with a political agenda who want me to, you know, crawl under my desk like I used to do in the 50s in school and cower, you know, but I'd rather have facts and be able to make decisions. I think there's a whole range of things. I recently was having a discussion actually with another member of our skeptic community, and I just said off the top of my head, well, race isn't a scientific concept, it's just a social construct. And he said, oh, I didn't know that. Well, you know, you can go all through high school and never learn, or, you know, all through and college, and it'll never come up. But scientists need to bring that information to us in a way that matters. I mean, it really does matter once you understand that race is a social construct. It informs a lot of public policy. So, you know, please keep it up. Find those teachable moments, not just for your students, but for the general public. Thank you.
This will be our last question then.
So recently, Bill Nye has just shown in that clip, said that teaching creationism to students is a bad thing. And now Ken Ham, president of the Creationist Museum, has recently attacked him back for saying that, using a lot of the arguments and values that we use against them, such things as he doesn't understand science, or he's indoctrinating kids with science. He's wanting to teach children what to think instead of how to think, and stifling critical thinking. So I was just wondering what the panel's thoughts were on the fact that they use our values against us in a kind of that hypocritical way.
My own response is you're not even worth responding to.
I often wondered if we shouldn't start teaching kids more about the value of science, like what it's accomplished and what it's good for. And it is sort of an underhanded way to say, well, yeah, you have your value system with your religion, but science has given mankind great things, and it's one of our greatest accomplishments is the scientific method. So maybe teach them that science is also something we should value.
I wanted to add to that. Okay. Scientists are actually burdened with the certain aspects of our own education in that we do think critically, and we hold ourselves to a high level of proof that on whether something is true or not. And so when we're confronted with someone about creationism or something like that, where really they're coming from an ideological standpoint, we want to put 400 facts in front of them and have that be something that will help, as if that would help convince them of anything new or change their opinions. But the older I get, the more I go along doing this, is that is actually not going to happen. And my interest at this point is how to basically not, like you're saying, you know, it's just not even worth an answer. Well, it's not worth an answer from a science standpoint, but it's going to have to be worth, and that's where we cross into policy and things like that. It's going to have to be worth an answer from a policy perspective. And I wanted to put in one last plug about the question we first had was, how do you teach children to think critically, like actually learn the skill of science? And it's sort of my plug for keeping laboratory experiments, the experimental aspect of science in the classroom, even though it costs a lot of money to do it. That's, people can lecture kids, and you know, until you're blue in the face, but until a child puts their hands on something and runs an experiment for themselves, even if it's not a true, you know, experiment, they didn't think it up out of their own mind, they're not ever going to even have the opportunity, I think, to learn, to actually learn the scientific thinking. So, you know, a lot of things are coming down to money right now, and I just wanted to put out that little plug, because with what we do, what I do, what you do in the geology field, we're really out there, you know, doing things, and we need people who need workers who can have those skills, and that they have to acquire it through this public education system where they do learn to think critically.
We need to keep laboratories, even in grade school, even when the kids, you know, I dissected frogs when I was in 7th grade. I mean, even stuff like that. It's so valuable, and so many students tell me that, wow, I went in the lab and now this stuff actually makes sense. They can see it, they can do it, they can figure it out for themselves, and it provides a whole new dimension to teaching. And unfortunately, especially classes for non-science majors rarely, if ever, have labs. And it makes it even harder to convey what science is and what science does in a way that's understandable. And that's really sad. Thank you so much for your panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Nice to meet everyone.
Nice to meet everyone.